When you hear that sound, it's time for Talk of the Bay. I'm joined by Mike Fox. He is a contributing reporter to places like NPR, PRX, and Free Speech Radio News. He's been reporting out of South America for the past 15 years, and he has a lot to say about what's happening right now in Venezuela. Thank you for joining us on Talk of the Bay, Mike.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
What do you think about the headlines that are coming out just today, that the 50 million barrels of oil are going to go to the U.S., that, that some prisoners have been let out? There's a lot of developments, but the big picture is it sounds like that Congress is actually going to vote on the War Powers Act. Can you respond to some of those recent headlines that were just today's developments in Venezuela?
Yeah, well, it's very clear that Trump is pushing his way and having it. Of course, the government in Venezuela is still run by Delcy Rodriguez, the former vice president, now interim president, who was sworn in after President Maduro was kidnapped by the United States and flown to the United States. And it's very clear that she is cooperating with Washington. Like you said, 50 million barrels. Trump announced that, hey, they're going to give us 50 million barrels. They're going to release some political prisoners. So it's very clear that Venezuela is saying, look, we'll give you some concessions. It is important to remember that, when I was living in Venezuela about 20 years ago, the average daily output of petroleum was somewhere between 1 million and 3 million barrels a day. So it's a good amount, but it's not like an insane amount. And if this leads to the possibility of lifting the oil blockade the United States has remained and keeps surrounding Venezuela, and it helps to lift the sanctions the United States has actually had more or less over Venezuela for the last decade, then it's obviously moving in the right direction. And clearly, Delcy Rodriguez doesn't want another, U.S. invasion, U.S. attack. And that's something that Trump has been very clear to say, look, we could do it again. And he's clearly holding that over the heads of those people who are in power in Venezuela right now.
What about the Congress deciding they are going to vote on the War Powers Act to either approve or disapprove of the war, at least having to vote on it?
Yeah, look, voting on it is huge. If they can approve it, if they can block Trump from being able to, try and do actions like what he did last Saturday abroad, that would be incredible. It's very clear right now that Trump is just trying to throw his weight every place in Latin America, and he's using this U.S. invasion as a way to improve his cards in any deal making, and he's trying to push against every left leader in the region. He's leaving his closest allies alone, and he's been talking about possible intervention in Cuba and Colombia. Although Colombia, we could talk about that, but Colombia seems like that may have been resolved just today. Mexico, and so Trump is kind of just throwing his weight around and using the possibility of this type of intervention in order to get people to make deals. And that's what he does. That's the bottom line here, right? And so if Washington can push back, if Congress can push back on Trump, I think it would be an extremely important measure. Even just to get to a vote would be huge.
Now, the threat of an actual invasion with American troops on the ground there seems to have been the unspoken thing that's hanging over this. And it seems also that recently there was a long interview with Trump by the New York Times in which he said there's going to be a very, very long war. And guess who was listening to that interview and reading it carefully? Congress. And I think it scared them. That's the analysis of why they're suddenly jumping to a vote. What is your take on the potential for what he just said, which is an endless war for oil in one of our South American backyards?
I mean, first off, this is just shocking because this is coming from the president that was supposed to be the isolationist, the peace president. This is the guy who has always critiqued, the never-ending U.S. wars abroad, and here he is trying to push this same idea. Now, on the other hand, Trump is known to say many things that he are not necessarily true, and I can imagine him in this situation. Just since he came to office in the second term, he's bombed 7 countries, one of them being Venezuela, and of course there are Iran, and there are several other. He has not actually wanted to put people on the ground. He hasn't wanted to put boots on the ground because he knows what that means. And look, the reality is that Venezuela and Venezuelans, not just the armed forces, but the organized members of the Bolivarian movement, there are so many reserves, and they are prepared, and they're not prepared to fight off, an invasion like what we saw last Saturday, where the United States cuts all possible communication, it controls everything, it shuts down electricity, and they just sweep in with planes, pick up Maduro, and sweep out. But they are prepared for a long, to fight a guerrilla war if they have to. And Trump has to know that. People in Washington have to understand that. And this is a movement. They're not folks that are just going to say, oh, yeah, come on in, it's fine. This is also, let me just say, this is also the reason why Trump didn't decide to just replace the Venezuelan government with Marina Corina Machado, the woman, the kind of the leader of the Venezuelan opposition, although there are many different opposition groups, and that's important, not highlighted often particularly in the U.S. press, but she is one of those kind of like, and she just won, the Nobel Peace Prize, although she has continually applauded intervention and violence and, of course, Trump's invasion. But regardless, the reason why it's very clear, the reason why he didn't want to put her there is, A, he said it himself, she doesn't have the support in Venezuela, but also implanting an opposition member onto that place and completely taking out the government would create a bloodbath and a civil war that could last for years. And that's something that Trump has stated before that he doesn't want, although now he comes out and saying, well, we might need to be on the ground and could take years. So, again, Trump, a lot of this is his bluster, a lot of pushing and saying, maybe we'll have to do this as a way to force people to negotiate with him and force his cards. Whether he would actually be willing to throw troops on the ground, I mean, that would just be clearly asinine. It would be insane for Venezuela. It'd be insane for the United States because it is a war that they could not win ever. And so it would be another Vietnam scenario. Does Trump want a Vietnam scenario, just across the Caribbean from the United States? I don't think. And I think that that's why he's chosen up until now to send out the troops, to send in the missiles, to send in the drones, to send in the helicopters, let them bomb, and get back home. That's been kind of his MO. But you never know because Trump is a wild card.
That's what I was going to follow up with, which the tilting at windmills all over the globe has already destabilized the world order.
Yes.
Given that kidnapping a head of state is a crime in most people's definition, except for their own. But it's also quite rich that we have someone who can't really govern their own country, who's got dictatorial aspirations, coming down hard on Maduro for being the same guy who basically, manipulated the polls to get in. So the moral authority of this also is difficult to parse, and it's hard to imagine the people supporting it, what their rationale. Like we asked, is this about oil? Is this about regime change? What is this about? There's no simple cohesive answer, perhaps because there is no cohesive strategy. Like if you could sum it up and explain how you see it as a correspondent who's been watching South America for a long time, what is going on? Why are they doing this?
I love this. Such a great question. Thank you. Well, so first off, we have to look at kind of the history of the use of the drug war terminology in order to take out our enemies in the region. Of course, that goes back to 1989 with the United States invasion of Panama, where they took out Manuel Noriega for, under allegations of drug trafficking and brought him back. And, of course, he was convicted and jailed. This is a carbon copy of that, except for the fact that at that point they had boots on the ground, and it took them 2 weeks to find Manuel Noriega. And here they just took him and got in and got out. But it's really interesting that the minute they got him to New York, then they decided to downgrade the supposed narco-terrorist organization, the Cartel de Soles. That is actually a group that doesn't exist. It never has. It's kind of a way of being. It's not an actual cartel. And they knew that, and they knew they couldn't get him charged on that. And that's why now they're kind of, okay, I guess we'll charge him on that or this other thing and kind of this and maybe a little bit of corruption. So it's very clear that this was an excuse to go in and get him. And they've been building that excuse, of course, by hitting supposed drug boats in the Caribbean. But actually, if you look at the bombing of the targeting of the boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, the majority of the boats that have been targeted were actually in the Pacific, far from Venezuela. And that's because, most of the drug trade from South America goes up the west coast. It goes up through the Caribbean and through Colombia, which is where most of these drugs come from. So Venezuela has nothing to do with that. So that's just a smokescreen. When they ask, hey, Trump, what else is happening here? Then he'll say, oh, it's all those dangerous migrants that have come to our border and they've been sending people in. So this is all bluster. It's all means of distracting. And of course, what's insane right now is usually when it's about the assets. In Panama, it was clearly about getting control of the Panama Canal again. 1989, they had already signed the agreement to hand the canal back over from the United States to Panama. And so that was a huge piece of this, and also showing that they had strength. And that's what's at play right here. There's several things. The first is clearly the assets. Oil is huge. Trump said it himself, and it's true for the United States. Look, if you look at all the different countries in line, you can add them all up. Every other country that is a major oil producer has massive reserves is someplace else in the world. Venezuela is right across the Caribbean. So that's huge. It is clearly about taking out one of the kind of thorns in the sides of Washington going back 20 years, right? And that's not just Maduro, but it's the Bolivarian movement, the Bolivarian revolution, which has always been kind of this beacon of the left, which has then supported other left movements and other left governments in the region, has been clearly always outspoken against the United States. So that is really, really important. But at the same time, really what this is about is also Cuba. Let's keep in mind that what we have in the Trump administration, Cuba is like for the Cuban American community, for Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, for those people in the Trump administration, in terms of geopolitics and politics, it is to try and take out what Cuba represents and has always represented. But in order to get at Cuba, you have to take out Venezuela first because of the support Venezuela's had for Cuba. And so it's about all those things. It's also about Trump really trying to, like I said before, he's trying to improve his cards in the region, and he's trying to make other countries bend to his will. If you look at the national security strategy that was released by Trump's administration at the very beginning of December, he talks in that about the Monroe Doctrine and the new Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Of course, Monroe, the doctrine, is the doctrine that's been used in order to justify United States intervention throughout the 20th century, largely in Central America and the Caribbean. It basically states that other countries aren't allowed to come in and that we have the right to kind of police the region. But it's been put on steroids, and that's why we've seen the first actual U.S. unilateral military intervention since the Panama invasion, essentially, since the late 1980s. And so Trump at this point is saying, no, I'm going to use the military. I'm going to be actively using the military. And if you don't, and in fact, what it says in that national security strategy is essentially, look, this is our new Trump corollary. We want to have access to all the assets in the region. We want to have a good location to be able to do these things. We want to work with other countries who are our friends to fight narco trafficking, and we want other people to do what we ask them to do. Essentially saying, you either do what we tell you to do or else. And that's kind of the theme of the national security strategy, in particular for Latin America, right, for the Western Hemisphere. And so all of that is encapsulated. That's what we're seeing right now. That's how come Trump is more than willing to send $40 billion to Argentina to shore up its economy at the same time as he's more than willing, because, of course, Javier Milei is a libertarian president, a close ally of Trump, and that's the same reason why Trump has been actively threatening violence and invasions against every country that is one of the adversaries or that are kind of the left countries in the region that have been vocal against, his attacks and his push into the region. So it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of oil. It's clearly about Trump pushing against all of his adversaries. It's about geopolitics, and it's clearly about trying to get Venezuela to bend to Donald Trump, get them out of the way, so then the United States can move on toward Cuba, which is for the Cuban American community, for the Cuban American lobby, for the Trump administration, politically speaking, like that is really the golden goose. That's where they want to get to.
It really can't help them in elections or any other political sense, though, wouldn't you say, as far as popularity of any of this, because of, well, the muddled reasons for going in, for one, but second, his promise both to his base, and it might have been the only thing, the left in the United States agreed with him on was, let's stop foreign wars. It can't be
That's
good
right.
for him politically at home. But maybe it fulfills promises to a small group of people who are refugees from those countries. We have just a few more minutes with you, Mike Fox. So where do we go from here? And what about the opposition in this country showing disdain for this whole process of bullying other countries into our submission?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the question. It can't be good for him. And let's hope that this actually does draw up enough ire from so many people, whether it's on the left or it's on the right, saying, look, you made some promises and you're not fulfilling those at all. I think he's hoping that enough people, particularly his supporters, because he didn't care about anybody else, but enough people will be on board and say, wow, finally, we got the oil. He's actually taking action. I think he's hoping that people are going to kind of back him, or he's hoping that there might be some backlash, and then he can make himself seem like a martyr. He can make himself, well, look, see, I knew we had to do this. So that's the one thing. I think the resistance in Washington is absolutely necessary. It's so needed from Congress, who have been just so silent on so many issues. And then there's also an essence of, look, there needs to be like a much larger vocal international voice against this as well, particularly in the United Nations. So many different countries and presidents of different countries have been talking about this. Where is the United Nations? They need to be vocal. They need to stand up. And then the other thing I would just say is that we know historically in Latin America, the more that the United States pushes onto the region, the more there is a backlash, and the more that people stand up. And sometimes, of course, Trump is now. We've got two huge elections happening this year, Colombia and Brazil, and these are both countries that are staunchly on the left, both countries that are extremely important for the left in the region. And Trump is obviously going to try and push against those. And it's clear that he's going to try and throw his weight around. Now, the question is, will that backfire, like what happened in Brazil last year when he imposed a 50% tariff? And then Lula said, you just can't do that, and I'm going to defend our interests against the United States aggression. And that really worked well for Lula. And so it's interesting. It'll be really interesting whether or not that kind of backfires for Trump in that same sense, or whether he's actually going to scare these other countries to voting in a right president, just because they're afraid that if there's somebody on the left, Trump might decide to bomb their country as well. So it's a crazy, terrifying moment that I don't think anyone expected, and it is literally, many analysts I've been speaking with have been talking about how it's a new chapter in Latin American relations, and it really is. Like, we can't see a time like this when you had a president who was this active and this threatening to other countries. I mean, maybe if we go back to, obviously, Reagan in the 1980s, but he wasn't doing things unilaterally like this. I mean, little stuff, Grenada, and then maybe if we go back to Teddy Roosevelt, the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, this is unprecedented. So it's a terrifying moment. But yes, let's hope that people in Washington and Congress are willing to really stand up to the bully who is sitting in the Oval Office right now.
Well, we do have the opportunity to call our Congress people right now. And there is a wonderful hotline. You can put them right in touch. I did it today, and you can do it too. Hey, Mike Fox, thank you so much for being part of our conversation this afternoon on Talk of the Bay. You can find his podcast where? You have a podcast called Stories of Resistance. So where's that to be found? Did I lose you? I may have. Well, thank you anyway for being on Talk of the Bay. We so appreciate it. And coming up next, an interview with Sarah Medviacki. She is a wonderful professor of international studies and politics at UC Santa Cruz. And we'll hear from her next. This is KSQD Santa Cruz. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and this is your Talk of the Bay.